Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this workshop, Why Burnout Matters, the Real Cost of Burnout in the Workplace. I'm Dr. Geri Puleo, and I'm going to lead you through some very surprising amounts and percentages of just exactly how burnout affects the employees and the organization. So let's get started. One of the things that will probably surprise you is that there are 11 controllable workplace health risks. And of these 11, stress, and in its extreme state, which would be burnout, is considered to be the most costly of all of these health risks. In fact, it's more expensive than the costs associated with smoking, obesity, or poor physical fitness. So if we look at burnout by the numbers, what do you think 25% represents? 25% indicates the numbers of workers who report that a nervous breakdown is imminent due to their high feelings of stress. So think about it. 1 out of every 4 workers feels that they're going to have a nervous breakdown at any time simply because of the high degrees of stress in their jobs. What do you think 60% represents? Well, think of all of the absences of workers who don't show up for work. Well, of these absences, surveys and studies have found that 60% of all absences are stress related. And here's the biggie. 90% of all of the visits to doctors' offices, 90% of all diseases are either caused by or complicated by the high levels of stress. Let's look at burnout and endorphins. With burnout, you might not realize that the high levels of stress actually affect your chemistry within your brain and within your body. So let's take a look at these endorphins. With the endorphins, when they're compromised due to high feelings of stress, your ability to think and feel are absolutely diluted. You don't think as well, and you're much less likely to empathize with coworkers or customers. In addition, your decision making, those skills are totally compromised because the part of your brain that deals with higher level executive functioning is compromised by the chemicals that surge through your body and your brain when you're under high stress. And finally, as anybody who's ever been burned out or known someone who has been burned out, your interpersonal skills absolutely go down the drain. They're totally deteriorated, and you find that you don't work as well within teams, nor can you empathize or engage or become excited about anything. And as a result, this really affects your productivity. One of the things I found in my research is something called the StressCosts formula. Now, it's a copyrighted formula by Chrysalis Performance Strategies. And if you want more information about it, I suggest that you check out their websites. But what they did was they calculated what are the real costs of stress? Because stress is usually viewed as something that's intangible and you feel it, but how do you convert that to a bottom line dollar amount? Well, here's how you do it. You take the cost of 19% of your absences. So this would be money that's paid out to salaried workers, even though they're not on the job. The cost to bring in temporary workers to replace those other workers. 19% of absenteeism. Then you look at your costs of turnover, and turnover costs are very high. They range from 150% of your salary and benefits package all the way up to 250 or 300%. Take those costs and then calculate 40% of them to really understand how stress affects the cost of turnover. But there's more. Your employee assistance programs, or your EAP, about 55% of those costs are associated with stress in your workforce. Take 30% of the costs associated with your short-term and long-term disability. Take about 10% of your drug plans, because about 10% of the drug plans are for psychotherapeutic drugs that are generally related to high levels of stress. Then look at your workplace accident costs. We all know how expensive they can be. About 60% of those costs are associated with mistakes and accidents by stressed out employees. Then there's still more. All of your stress-related workers' comp claims would obviously be calculated into the total cost of stress in your organization. And then finally, if there's any lawsuits that are related to stress, obviously those lawsuits would also be included in calculating how much stress is costing your particular company. What's interesting with these can be some very high numbers. But according to the stress cost formula, these percentages, which have been substantiated with research, are extremely conservative based on the findings. So what that means is the real cost of stress to your organization can be much higher. So let's take a look at some bottom line numbers. Burnout by the dollars, 57 billion. 57 billion represents the cost to U.S. companies for stress-related accidents, stress-related problems in their employees. 50% and higher, everybody's trying to reduce their healthcare costs. Well, the healthcare costs for workers who are experiencing and reporting high levels of stress are up to 50% higher than those for non-stressed out workers. And what does that all mean? The cost of stress for U.S. companies is estimated between 150 and 300 billion dollars. So if anybody ever says to you, stress and burnout is just part of the workplace and what's it going to cost me? Turn to them and say, it costs an awful lot, not just in the physical and emotional toll on the workers, but also into the bottom line dollars upon which companies depend to run their business. So burnout is really costly. In an upcoming webinar, I'll be talking about ways to overcome burnout, both on an individual basis as well as from an organizational perspective.